Famous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot is back at it again, solving a murder case in an exotic location where he just happened to be on vacation. Is it formulaic? Maybe. Am I mad about it? Let's find out. Hi everybody, welcome back to Between the Lines, and today I'm going to be reviewing Agatha Christie's famous mystery novel, Evil Under the Sun. For the first part of this video, I'm going to keep it relatively spoiler-free. If you haven't read this book, I don't want to ruin it for you, especially a book like this where the whole conceit of it is finding out who did it, as it is a whodunit. And later on, I'll get into spoilers, but I'll make sure to put a warning up so you don't get the whole thing ruined for you. So Evil Under the Sun is actually the third Agatha Christie novel I've read, and the third I've read featuring Poirot. I haven't read any of the other novels that feature any of her other detectives or standalones. I've read plenty of her short stories as well, all of them featuring Poirot as the main character. Before this, I had read Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, so I was very excited to get into this one and to get into a new mystery featuring Poirot. So what is Evil Under the Sun about? Well, it features Hercule Poirot, again on vacation. I don't know if this guy ever works, who happens to be at the Jolly Roger Hotel off the English coast in late August, and while he's enjoying his time there, a rather scandalous woman is murdered, and of course, as they are in a sort of isolated scenario, Poirot has to figure out which of the other vacationers killed the woman. So what are my thoughts? To be honest, this one was just kind of okay for me. It was very fun and entertaining. It was a page turner. I finished it in a couple days, and it's got a really fun setting. It takes place at a hotel at the end of summer, and people are there just on vacation and with the murder and everything. And Christie does a really good job describing the location, and this is something across the other novels I've read of hers as well, where she's really good at laying out the geography of the space and getting you to understand where everything is so that when the story unfolds, you can follow it along without having to play catch up. And you know what? In its favor, it's got Poirot solving a crime. I'm totally into that. I'm not going to turn away a book that features him trying to solve a murder. So this one follows a pretty typical murder mystery formula. You got your cast of characters in an isolated location, somebody dies, the detective is called in to solve the murder. He finds clues, he interviews the subjects, there's twists and turns, and the murder is revealed. It's nothing too crazy, and it's definitely something that's a little bit more on the formulaic side, having come from Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, which played a little bit with the formula. I was a little, not let down, but underwhelmed maybe, that this one didn't do anything creative with that formula. This book was also incredibly fast-paced. I found that in comparing it to the two novels, this one didn't really take as much time to establish the characters. And all in all, it was very straightforward. I mean, there was nothing that came out of left field here. The reveal itself wasn't too out of nowhere or wasn't a super creative solution. And honestly, the mystery itself wasn't as enthralling as maybe the other books or the short stories I've read. The victim itself was actually a pretty complex person, and I'll get into that a little later when I can talk the details, but the actual process of solving the crime wasn't anything to remark upon. Another thing that didn't really work as well for me was that in this one there were a lot of characters that didn't matter to the story at all. Usually in these murder mysteries, everyone could be a suspect. This wasn't the case in Evil Under the Sun. There were a lot of characters that were just kind of there on vacation, not doing anything to affect the plot from beginning to end, and my question the whole time was kind of, why? I feel like the stories work better when everyone who's involved could be a suspect. It just heightens that tension for me. And having characters that don't matter to the plot at all on top of the cast that does matter is kind of hard for me, because in the past I've had trouble keeping track of all the characters. Good thing in the versions that I have, they have kind of a cast list at the beginning that breaks down all the characters and who they are without giving anything away. But having all these extra characters that didn't matter to the plot made it a bit more confusing for me. Not to mention all the people who had military ranks and were referred to by their rank and not their name made it super confusing for me. Without giving away too much, I also wanted to say that the execution of the crime requires a much higher suspension of disbelief maybe than some of the other stories I've read. Maybe not so much as Murder on the Orient Express, but in this case, a lot of things went off kind of without a hitch and perfectly, and there were no mistakes that happened, which is something I liked in Death on the Nile, is that without spoiling things got messy. And in this one, everything was so clean cut, everything went super smoothly, there were no issues, and that's something I really like in my stories, is seeing characters try to overcome obstacles when they're put in their plans. So for those who haven't read Evil Under the Sun, would I recommend it? Well, yes, if you're into Agatha Christie. So if you're into her books, murder mysteries, whodunits, definitely give this one a go. It's a good example of the formula without deviating too much from it. So if that's what you're looking for, a very straightforward murder mystery, clean cut, then I would say go for it. I mean, it's a fun book. It features Hercule Poirot solving a crime. You can't go wrong with that. All right, now we'll get into spoilers. So from this point on, I'm not gonna hold anything back. I'm gonna talk about who did the crime, who were the suspects, all the details. So this is your last warning. I should also point out at this time that there will probably be spoilers for Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile. Something that really struck me in this book was the complexity of the victim. Arlena Marshall is a person who on kind of first read seems like just and I know it's kind of an unfortunate word to describe someone, but they even say it in the book, is a gold digger, and the people in the hotel are either super put off by her or super attracted to her, depending on the character. And at first she seems like this kind of shallow, vapid character with nothing much going for her outside of her looks, but on a closer read and later on as the story develops, you kind of find out that this person really was a victim. This whole thing was kind of something she put on, and she had really nothing inside her. She wasn't a complete person, and the way she was taken advantage of by the murderers was something that was actually really sad. And thinking about this after having finished the book kind of made me appreciate it a bit more and made me really feel for Arlena Marshall as a character. Something I also really liked, and this isn't some like grand storytelling or thematic thing, was just the execution of the murder itself. I think was pretty creative. Not so much the aftermath of the murder, covering it up and getting to the right place at the right time, but the part where Redfern and Brewster canoe up to where they find the body and where you think the murder has taken place, but it turns out that that's not actually the body and that Arlena Marshall is still alive in a cave nearby, and that the person there lying on the ground was actually Christine Redford pretending to be the victim. I thought that was pretty interesting and really fun and took me a bit by surprise. I like when things happen like that. And now to get into the things that maybe didn't work as well for me. I touched on them in the spoiler-free section, but now I want to get into a bit more detail. Starting with the characters that didn't really offer anything to the plot, specifically the gardeners. And I can't remember their names, but there were two other families that were there, I think, at the hotel at that time. And I don't even know if they really make an appearance on the page outside of being referred to by the characters who are there. So my thought is, why are these people even included in the story? What is the point of them? It's not heightening the dramatic tension. They're not suspects. Why are they here? And in talking about characters that offer nothing, there was also a couple plot lines that offered nothing, namely the one involving drugs. So in the course of the investigation, they find a box with a bunch of heroin in it near the spot where Arlena Marshall was murdered, and that really has no bearing on the actual investigation other than it creates maybe another option for why Arlena Marshall was murdered. And it's inferred that Horace Blatt, the big loud vacationer there, is sort of responsible or a part of some sort of drug smuggling ring that's happening on the island, but it's never followed up on, and I don't know if it was fully confirmed that he had anything to do with it or why that was being inferred. So it was a bit confusing and ultimately went nowhere, unless I missed something, which I very well could have. So if I missed something completely with that plot line, please let me know. And the thing that didn't work for me, probably the worst, was the whole timing of the murder and all the things that had to happen with switching the time on Linda's watch and all that, and getting to a certain place at a certain time and having to run from the hotel to the cave to the ladder and back and all that, and the sunscreen. It was just a lot happening and a lot that had to go right for the murderers. In comparing this to Death on the Nile, which I actually found a lot of similarities between the two, everything went off without a hitch for these murderers. Everything went as they planned until the actual investigation. In Death on the Nile, things got messed up. The murderers had to improvise and it created mistakes, which created avenues for the investigators to figure things out. In Death on the Nile, the killers were kind of dumb and made those mistakes, and it made it way more interesting and engaging for me. I felt like this was kind of another version of Death on the Nile, but not executed as well. There were a lot of things that happened almost exactly the same in both books. Something that both books shared was kind of a tricksy couple with a fake love triangle. In both novels, there was a couple who seemed to love each other until the man left the woman for a third party, in both cases another woman. But it turns out in the end, in both cases, that the man and the woman, the original couple, were scheming to take advantage of the third party. That happened in both books almost identically, but this one didn't do it as well. The reasons for the whole scheming weren't as clear to me, besides the fact that they were killers. This is just what they do. But in the first one, there was more of like a money angle and the characters were super dumb. So it made sense that they would try to do this harebrained scheme to take advantage of this other person. The structure of Death on the Nile also allowed it for us to get to understand understand and empathize with the characters for a bit more time, and the story unfolded at a bit more of an organic pace, and also it jumped perspectives a bit more, allowing us to get into the heads of more characters so that when the investigation was happening, we kind of knew the lay of the land a bit more, and it made it more engaging. And I think I preferred the settings of the first two books I read compared to this one. It was still fun, but the other two had an atmosphere to them and a danger and a tension that I just don't think that this hotel had. Like being stuck in a snowdrift on a train in the middle of nowhere, or on the Nile on a boat with all these crazy people. This one was just kind of okay, and it was a little less isolated with them having access to the mainland and people going back and forth. And the last thing that didn't really work for me was the stuff that didn't age well in this book. I know Christie's a little notorious for the stuff she wrote, especially considering it came out in the 20s and 30s and 40s. So of course things aren't going to hold up as well or look a little tough in the light of time. And specifically for me in this one, it was the ending, that involving the character of Rosamund, who was a very successful dressmaker and she was having a great life, but ultimately gave it up just for love to settle down in the countryside and be somebody's wife. They set that up earlier in the book, but it didn't really feel warranted in the end that she would just give up everything, this great career and all that, just to settle down with some guy she had a brief fling with when they were much younger. And as far as Christie books go, that isn't too bad. At least in this one, there aren't any scheming evil Italians. My people have been cast in a pretty bad light in some of these books. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the adaptations, which I haven't seen. I heard the movie is very silly and changes a lot from the book, but if you have seen it, let me know if it's any good and worth watching. I also wanted to know if it's worth watching the Poirot series as I read each individual book. I've wanted to watch that show for a long time, but didn't know whether I should finish all the Poirot books and then watch it, or kind of do it, like I said, as I finish every book. I feel like I might mess up the order of the show if I do that though. Also, let me know if you're making your way through Agatha Christie's works. If you've read this one, if not, will you skip it? If you did read it, did you enjoy it, or did you have more of a mixed reaction like I did? Don't forget to do all the YouTube stuff like liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.